Oh yeah, that looks really cool. Looks almost like a lamp or something, right? Like he's glowing from inside. Wonder if I could turn this into an actual lamp of some kind. That would be a cool project, but maybe something for another day.
And yes, today is that day. I knew I wanted to use LEDs for this project, and I figured I might as well use RGB LEDs so I could turn the lamp different colors. So I figured it would be best to print another Jabba using uncolored transparent resin, which is what you see here. This is the ABS-like resin from Elegoo. I printed this exactly the same way as I printed the blue version, which I showed in my video about printing holographic action figures, so you can go ahead and check that out if you're interested. Now that I had the bulb for my lamp, I needed some kind of a base to house the LEDs and electronics. Now I could have put some LEDs inside the Jabba figure itself, but then you'd be able to see hot spots where each of the LEDs was shining, and I really wanted a uniform glow, so I knew that I wanted the light to shine up from below. So I went into Fusion 360 and started designing a simple rectangular base, as you can see here. I added a Return of the Jedi logo that I found online and then extruded it so that it would be sticking out from the surface there on the front. Now, I could have gone with maybe a throne design or a skiff design or something like that, but I wanted to keep this a little bit more simple and also try something that looked like it could have conceivably been a vintage product in some sense. So yeah, this seemed like it would work. Then I went and added some fillets to all the edges to round them off and added a cavity inside where we were going to store the LEDs and electronics. I added a recessed area there at the top where a lid can fit, and then move that off to the side so that we would have basically a box with a lid. And finally, I added a couple of holes on the side, which I will explain the use of in a little bit. So I decided to take this and print it off as a kind of a rough prototype just to check my measurements and whether or not this concept would work as intended. It still took 20 some odd hours to print, and the final version ended up taking more than 40 hours to print. This is the finished prototype version. It's a little rough looking. Still got all of the support material in the logo there. And it also ended up lifting up from the print bed on the sides here, as you can see. So it's not exactly a perfect print, but it's fine for our purposes. I also went ahead and printed the lid just to see if that would fit, and I also put a sort of rectangular slot in it so that I could test what it would look like if I had some light shining up from the base into Jabba. And it looked more or less the way I expected, so I decided to go ahead and run with this design, but of course I wasn't going to use it just like this. I wanted something that would fit Jabba's form a little bit closer, so it would look like it was part of the base, and this wouldn't do, of course, so I decided to go back to Fusion 360 and try and alter the lid. So what I really wanted was to have a way for the Jabba model to kind of sink down into the lid to make it look like it was part of the base, but I had a lot of trouble trying to do that in Fusion 360 because the STL here, the Jabba model, is very complex. It's got a lot of triangles, and even when I tried to sort of simplify it within Fusion 360, it didn't work. So instead I went to Mesh Mixer and used the reduce function to drastically reduce the polygon count and make it a lot more of a simple model. I did try and take that model into Fusion 360, but had trouble getting it to do what I wanted, and I knew I could do it in an instant in Tinkercad, so I just did that and ported both of these models, the lid and the Jabba model, into Tinkercad, and turned the Jabba model into a hole, as they say, and then combined the two, and that left me with the lid with a more or less Jabba-shaped hole in it that the actual action figure, the 3D printed one, could sink down into. And here we have the printed version of the new lid. You can see there's a little bit of a lip here where the model can sit, and that's the reason why I didn't want to just trace around the shape of the model and cut that out, because I wanted it to sort of have a place where the actual model could sit. And then, of course, I'll attach it somehow and glue it to the lid. But yeah, this seemed to work well. I decided I would go ahead and reprint the base in higher quality, so that's what this is right here. If we look a little bit more closely, you can see it came out pretty well. This is a 0.1 millimeter layer height, so it's pretty smooth, and I think if we were to paint this, it wouldn't take a lot of sanding to make it look relatively smooth on the outside, and luckily the lid does still fit. Now we do have a bit of a job ahead of us in removing all this support material on the logo. Originally I decided to try and print it with the logo facing up so that I wouldn't need any support material, but it turned out that the little letters were just lost. It wasn't printing out properly, so I had to do it this way. I will say removing the support material from this logo and having it look halfway decent was quite a challenge, and even at the end, when I had removed it all, it looks kind of rough, so I knew that I would have to, paint and finish this. I briefly toyed with the idea of just leaving it 3D printed, but, that seems kind of lazy, so I decided to go all the way. So the first thing I did was to sand both of the parts with some, of course, sandpaper to give the paint a chance to stick better. Then I sprayed them both with some filler primer to fill in as many of the gaps and imperfections as possible. Then I used some finer grain sandpaper to sand the primed surfaces, and once I had that looking reasonably smooth, I sprayed it again with the filler primer and sanded it again, and then finally it was ready for the first coat of paint. Now, I wasn't entirely sure, even at this stage, what I was going to do in terms of the color, but I decided to go with a black undercoat first, and then put a metallic silver on top of that. I generally find that having a black undercoat helps metallic paints look metallic, but it may not be entirely necessary. I ended up using this Krylon Premium Metallic Original Chrome, not because it's particularly good or anything, but I had bought 2 or 3 cans of this on clearance a couple of years ago, and I've just been waiting for something to use it on, so I decided I would give it a shot with this project. And I will say it does come out of the can, or especially once it's dry, looking relatively chrome-like, more so than the average silver paint, but it does have some issues which I will talk about in a little bit. So here we have the base in silver, and if we look at it without looking at it too closely, it does look pretty cool. It's got reflective qualities to it, but if you look a little bit closer, you can see, well, first of all, here's a spot where I just touched it once earlier and it no longer seems shiny, so it's a very fragile finish, and there are a lot of imperfections to it as well. And plus, this shiny chrome look is not really something I thought was necessarily a good match for Jabba, so I decided, instead of just leaving it like this, to add some weathering. I think the logo came out relatively well, though, compared to the way it looked before. So the weathering consisted essentially of just painting some black paint on top of the silver and then wiping it off with a Kleenex, and not getting all of it off, of course, letting a little bit of it remain behind as a kind of weathering coat. And I did several passes at this and refined it a little bit as I went, but this is the main idea. I knew I wanted to use the classic red logo here, but for the red to really look good and pop, I figured I would have to put a white undercoat on it first, so that's what I was doing here. And once that was dry, I went ahead and put the red on top of it, and of course I had to go back and refine the lines to get rid of all of the white that might be peeking out at the edges and things like that. But I think it turned out relatively well. Before we take a closer look at the base, I want to talk about the electronics a little bit. For the illumination for this project, I decided to use some RGB LED tape. Looks like this. You can get hundreds of different kinds, and they're all pretty similar. They've got stickiness on the back there, and you just, you can see the individual LEDs. And it comes with this control box with a connector that you connect to the tape itself, if you manage to get it the right way around. There we are. And also infrared receiver that you use with the remote control, which allows you to actually turn the lights on and off and control them in various ways. Here we have the plug-in, and if you see, we can turn off the light here and give you a better look at what they look like, but that's the basic idea. I'm just going to use my prototype version of the base there in the background to kind of help me with this. I'm using a piece of card to actually attach the tape to, just to make it easier to remove if necessary and easier to work with. When I was sort of test fitting it, I found that this box was really kind of too tall, so I decided to just open it up. It just sort of snaps together, and take out the PCB and other little bits, and this would allow me to flatten it out quite a bit, like that. And basically I just hot glued the PCB in place, just sort of generally in the middle of this card. I was going to make this a little bit more elegant and have maybe the AC port actually sticking out of the back of the box, but I didn't really want to spend a lot of time iterating on this design, so I just decided to do whatever would work. As I mentioned, the tape is self-adhesive, but I don't have a lot of confidence in this adhesive actually staying in place for very long, so instead of just using that, I decided to hot glue it to the card and just sort of run it up and down in lines just to fill up the available space to me. I was a little concerned because I noticed that if you have the tape kind of all in a bunch and turn it on, it gets fairly warm, and in fact there's a warning in the manual about not turning it on when it's on the spool that it comes with, but I found out that when it's just out in a line like this, it really doesn't get warm at all, so I think it's fine. And here we have the final product. It's not exactly the most attractive looking thing in the world, but it'll be completely covered, so it's not a big deal. I just had the tape run directly over the circuit board here, and I think it'll be fine. And yes, it does still function, which is good. I actually had quite a bit of tape left over at the end of this, probably only used about 1/5 of the full roll. But with this kind of tape, all you have to do is take a pair of scissors and cut it right there at one of the junction points, and it'll be fine. So that's what I'm going to do right now. There it is. Unfortunately, once you've cut the tape off, you can't use the remainder of the tape for anything, at least with this kind of tape that I have right here. I did try, just as an experiment, soldering two ends of the tape back together, and it did work, but you only get one control box, so you can't really use the remainder for anything. So basically all we have to do at this point is to insert the card into the base and run the wires in the appropriate holes and so forth. So let's go ahead and do that. So first I threaded the power cord into the hole I made in the back and put the card with the lights on it inside the inner cavity there. Then I took the receiver for the infrared remote and put it through this hole here and put a little hot glue just to keep it in place. I ended up putting a little too much hot glue in there, but I was able to clear it off relatively easily. And I just had to plug the power cord into the PCB, and the bottom half of the base was ready, but we still had the lid to take care of. So here is the lid with a Jabba-shaped hole in it, and here's the Jabba, and we just put them together, and there we go, more or less. But I obviously wanted it to be attached somehow permanently, so I decided I would use hot glue to just give it a little bit of a seal between the two there. And here's the moment we've all been waiting for. First, we're going to put the lid on top of the base, and you know, it looks fairly decent just sitting there as an object on its own, but you know, we want to, of course, see it light up, so let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to use this remote control to control it. It came with the LED light strip. You can use it to turn them on and off, or adjust the brightness up here, or you can choose individual colors and also some preset patterns and things like that. Even though the IR receiver is on the right side, you can pretty much control it from anywhere in the front. So let's turn it on. There we go. This one we have here is the fade effect that goes from one color into another. I think this is probably my favorite of the effects. It's a little hard to see on camera. I'm going to have to turn the lights down more to give you a better idea of what it actually looks like in person. Let me go ahead and do that right now. So I'm just going to run quickly through all of the color choices that you have as dedicated buttons on the remote. There's probably about 20 choices there. As I said, you can control the speed of the various effects. I'm going to show you that now, but I should give a warning to anyone who might have a photosensitivity that this could be a problem for you, so you may want to look away until I say it's okay. At the slowest setting, it's just kind of flashing on and off, but if we crank it all the way up to the fastest setting, it gets pretty intense. This is like some sort of bizarre Jabba-themed rave, I think. It's kind of cool, though. But as I said, my favorite effect, I think, is the fade effect, where one color kind of blends into another one. And you can control the speed on that as well to make it very fast or relatively slow. I'll show you the fast speed right here in just a second. It's not quite as seizure-inducing as the other kind, but still kind of trippy. Alright, so we are now done with all of the flashing light effects. So that's my Jabba lamp. Now, as Odin from Odin Makes would say, there are many ways to make a Jabba lamp, but this is the way I decided to make mine. I'm sure there are better ways to do certain things, and I've never really tackled a project like this before, so I did learn some things in the process. And I hope maybe you did as well, or at least were entertained. So thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you again soon.